but everyone was taking the news in their own way and processing the grief in their own way. And that might have translated differently in how they communicated with me, if that makes sense.
Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Entering Motherhood, a podcast dedicated specifically to new moms going through this amazing journey in life. I'm your host, Sarah Bilger, a postpartum nutritional coach / mechanical engineer. And as always, I'm so excited to be here with you and share all of the information I've been lucky enough to obtain since becoming a mom. In this episode, we talk with Justine and hear her story of how she lost her first son, Steven, and how she has created a space to help other moms who have been through infancy and pregnancy loss. I do just want to take a quick moment before we really jump into this episode and mention that we talk about infant and pregnancy loss here today. We talk about the death of a child and what it was like for Justine during this time. If this topic may be something that is hard for you to listen to, I do understand if you wish to stop here. Although I do think that these conversations are needed and important. It's so beneficial to hear from those who have dealt with loss and to hear their story and understand their perspective, because I think with this, we can better understand what someone is going through in a situation that we have never personally experienced. We can try to understand what they have been through, and we can also find comfort and relate to this if it's something that we have personally been through. So here we go. Okay, so hi Justine, and welcome to Entering Motherhood.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so glad to have you here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Justine and I live in Eastern North Carolina. I've been all around, but we settled here while my husband worked on his master's, which he just finished. So that's pretty awesome. I am mom of two, and I have a non-living son and one living son. So my firstborn is Steven, and he was born about 2 years ago, early. We found out his heart wasn't beating at a routine 22-week ultrasound, and I was induced the same night, and then he was born the next day. And then my second son, Everett, he was born in January of this year, and we didn't find out how or why Steven died. We had an autopsy done and they did some testing, but we didn't get any answers. So going through Everett's pregnancy was pretty hard. I was pretty anxious through the whole thing. And so after he was born, I decided to start a podcast called Expecting Rainbow. And that talks about experiencing life after pregnancy and infant loss.
Yeah, great. So, I can't even imagine what that would have been like. And at 22 weeks, were you showing? Had family and friends known? Where were you at on your journey?
So I was kind of showing a little bit. I pretty much looked bloated, so it wasn't really I don't think many people could tell. I was in that stage where I guess they say even if you can tell someone's pregnant, you don't ask if they're pregnant, but I was definitely in that stage where it might feel rude to ask if you're pregnant or not. Um, but we were still telling people. So we had told all our family, and I had actually was just told people like 2 days before we found out his heart wasn't beating. So we were still telling friends. We didn't do a public announcement or anything.
Okay. And then I guess just what was that? What was going on in your head? So you had gone to the doctors for your 22-week checkup?
So we had gone to an ultrasound at 16 weeks. And at that ultrasound, they said they saw a little shadow, and it's called an echogenic bowel. And so they said it could mean something or it could mean nothing. So that was not super helpful. And when we went home to Google it, which, that's always a trip to do, but we Googled it and they said, a very small percentage of people, um, like a very small percentage, like that could mean something bad. And so I was like, oh, it's going to be fine. But they had scheduled us to see an MFM on at 20 weeks. And when we went in, he was like, well, why are you guys here? And like, are you guys getting these testing things that we're recommending? And I was like, well, we do plan on getting testing done, but we just couldn't get it done in time before this appointment. And the only reason they had wanted us to get it earlier was in case we wanted to terminate the pregnancy, which that was not really an option for me. So I figured, it's fine for us to get the testing done in after the time frame they wanted us to do it. But that testing ended up coming inconclusive anyways, but we got the results after the 22-week ultrasound. So basically he said at 20 weeks, we are not going to do an ultrasound because we can't tell anything um, in just 2 weeks. So to come back 2 weeks later for an ultrasound. Um, so that's what we did. Um, and I kind of wish I didn't know that I could have advocated for an ultrasound. I think it was an insurance thing, but the doctor had told me we are unable to do an ultrasound or there's no point in doing one. And I think if I had to do it over again, I would have just pushed for it, even if I had to pay out of pocket. And I didn't know that was an option. But because later they were saying, well, we don't know exactly when Stephen died or when his heart stopped beating. We didn't really get any answers. All the tests and the autopsy showed that everything was fine and that there was nothing wrong. So I often wonder if we had gotten that 20-week ultrasound, if we would have found out that he had already died, or if there was something going on. That usually that's pretty early, I think, to prevent something from happening, but even just to see, or maybe we would have gotten more answers, if we had found out earlier.
And for Stephen, did you have the name already picked out, or you had decided on that name after the 22 weeks?
No, we named him at the hospital in the waiting room before they brought us in. So we named him pretty last minute. We had a list of names for him, and Everett was actually one of them. But the reason why we chose Everett was because Stephen was supposed to be born on Chinese New Year. And, every Chinese New Year, how there's like the year of the horse, or so that's when the cycle starts over. And so he was supposed to be born in the year of the pig, and Everett means brave boar. So I just thought it was a cool connection, but he ended up not being born in the year of the pig or the boar, and he was born in the year of the dog. So we ended up not naming him Everett, which was at the top of the list. But his brother was born right before the year of the pig ended, and so that's why we named him that.
That's so interesting. I love finding out the meaning of names.
Yeah, yeah. It definitely was. My name has no meaning. My parents liked it because it sounded similar to the Chinese name they were giving me, but but I think my name was really just found in a baby book. So yeah, it was really interesting as a parent to come up with a name and to find meaning in a name. And my husband and I had a hard time agreeing on names we liked. So that was an interesting journey.
I feel like that's pretty common. Sometimes it's hard to agree on names.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So then, after that appointment, you were induced and then gave birth to him?
Yeah, so once I was like really shocked with the news, and but I guess I didn't know how to react right away. So my first question to the doctor was like, okay, well, like what am I supposed to do? And she said, your options are you can like wait for your body to go into labor naturally, but they recommended I get induced because who knew when my body would do that, or if my body even knew that the baby had passed away. um and so we chose to get induced so that we could find answers earlier. Um and she said, you know, you can get an autopsy, we can also test the placenta, we can like take your blood. And um and so it was also really weird, like after I got home, we didn't choose to get induced until after we got home. And so when we did go home, it was really weird because, you know, when you're pregnant, you feel like, wow, like my body is making this baby and it's supplying life and nutrients to grow this baby. And so to know that I had a baby inside me that was not alive and there was nothing I could do about it, you know, it was weird. And I just didn't really know like how to handle those feelings and that emotion. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be giving life to a baby, but but like I'm not able to do that. Like there's nothing that my body can do. So we ultimately decided to get induced, to go to the hospital and to get induced. And then yeah, I got Pictocin, and then I think they put we got to the hospital at like 4 p.m. and then they started administering the Pictocin at like 8 or 10 p.m. or something. And then he was born at around like, I think it was like 2:52 in a.m. the next morning. So I went through it, like I felt the contractions and I had to, you know, put my legs up and push. I didn't have to be dilated much as like giving as a like a full term baby, since he was still pretty small, but I still had to wait for the right dilation and then push to deliver him. And then also after he was delivered, I had to keep pushing to get the placenta out. So it was still you know, very much a birthing process for
Right.
sure.
And so, in between your 22-week ultrasound and being induced, was there any support given, or did the doctor recommend what you could be doing or how to cope with this? What was going on in your head? What did you do?
So between that 20 and 22-week ultrasound, I honestly was just confident like that everything was going to be okay. You know, I had no reason to think that um so I guess in my mind the worst case scenario was that there would be some type of genetic disorder, or, you know, maybe the baby would have some health problems. There was no reason for me to think that the baby was going to die. I just had no idea that that was one of the things that was gonna happen. So I don't really feel like there was much support, especially, and I think part of it was because it was I was still in the second trimester, and so, there's and I hadn't even reached, 24 weeks, which is considered the viability week, I guess. So I don't think that there was any instructions or, uh yeah, I'm not sure if there was anything that I could have done except to, get sleep, be healthy, eat right, but I certainly wasn't given any instructions on what I could be doing more, except to get the blood tests and stuff.
Right.
Um,
And what about in preparation for being induced?
yeah, I did not have, much instruction for that either, except to call the hospital and get it scheduled and to go to the hospital, which, uh, one, I wish they had told me, and even, for a live pregnancy, I wish they had told me to eat because I had not eaten anything that day, and, and we got a small snack before going to the hospital, but I was so hungry and, just, like, wasn't able to eat anything while I was waiting to be induced or while I was waiting for the induction to work. Um, and then actually when I went to the hospital, I think there was some miscommunication. So when you go to the hospital, you have to check in, and I checked in with the front desk, and the lady asked me, "When is your due date?" And so I was like, "Well, the due date is February 5th." And she was confused and she's like, "Oh, so why are you here?" And so I was like, "Well, my baby died, so I'm getting induced." And that was real awkward, for her. I guess it was awkward for me too, but yeah, so it was kind of a weird, I think, it was a weird experience checking in because they didn't know why I was there to deliver. Um, yeah, so there wasn't really much preparation for that either. Just like go to the hospital, check in, and then, we'll we'll get you ready or whatever.
Yeah, like there was no kind of note on your record of what you were going there for. And I feel like that must have been really difficult. You're already going through this loss of your child and the nurse is unaware of why you're there.
Yeah.
Having to explain that.
I feel like even, and I think maybe there are some instances where they would put a note, but I think there definitely should have been a lot more attention or care going into reading my file, or I don't know. I don't know like what on their end could have been done better, um to do that, but yeah, there I feel like there definitely should have been something done, so that they would know.
How was your support system at that point? Your family and friends, and had they been informed or
Um, yes. So the first person I called was my mom, and the first person my husband called was his mom. And then after I called, just a few of my closest friends, but we didn't really make an announcement, until a couple days later. And I did it over Facebook because I didn't, we were still telling people. And I also couldn't imagine just having all these conversations being like, yeah, the baby died. So I just thought, making a Facebook post would be the best way to reach the most people without having to have all these individual conversations. And I think the support was, I don't want to say it was bad because it was, you know, if you haven't gone through it or if you don't know anyone who has gone through pregnancy or infant loss, you don't really know how to react. Um, and so I think everyone had good intentions, um, but everyone was taking the news in their own way and processing the grief in their own way. Um, and that might have translated differently in how they um, communicated with me, if that makes sense. Um, so, like, my mom and, well, our parents lost a grandchild. And so, but I think they also wanted to be there for me and my husband as parents. And, and so, there was a lot of people trying to comfort us and say the right things, but there's just a lot of things that are not necessarily the right things to say, I guess, when someone's baby died.
Right. What would you recommend friends and family to do to help support someone who has been through an experience like you had?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because everyone is so different. I think the biggest thing is to just mourn with them and be sad with them. I think it's okay to be sad. I think death is uncomfortable in any capacity. Um, and so we have to realize that grieving over someone's death is normal and it's okay to be sad. It's not a problem that needs to be fixed. And so I think I just needed people to be sad with me. Um, you know, I had I was I had people tell me, it's better this way. If your baby was sick um in the womb, then they were only going to be sicker outside of the womb. And so I had people tell me, it's better that Stephen died earlier. Um for his sake, or I had people say, well, you should be happy because, babies go to heaven. And so we should be happy that he's in heaven. I was told to not cry too much because it was bad for my eyes. And so um, I was told a lot of different things. And when I really just needed someone to be sad with me and to say, this really sucks and no one deserves this. You didn't deserve this. Steven didn't deserve to die. Um, and so I think that's the biggest thing, to just be there and mourn. And if you don't know what to say, you don't really have to say anything. I think sorry that this happened and it sucks that this happened is enough. Um, but the second thing is, and for me, Stephen had a name, and so it was a big deal for people to say his name and to acknowledge that he was born, that he existed. I know that not every mom gets that. Um, I guess not every mom gets to name their child or has a child to hold. And I've met a lot of moms who didn't get to hold their babies, or um, whether it's because they miscarried their baby or for some other reason. But if a baby has a name, um then say their name for sure.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just listening to your story and hearing your viewpoint, it's amazing that you have taken something that so many people can see as such a struggle, and you've really found a way to help others. And like you said, just saying his name, even, and really just expressing that it happened is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even after too, it's it's about um always acknowledging them or their existence. I so it's been 2 years since Stephen died, and um even though, and I've met people um who their baby died 6 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and I think even at 2 years, I'm noticing, every year people are less inclined to mention Stephen, and but for me, I think about him every day, and so I do want people to acknowledge his birthday every year, and I do want people to acknowledge his existence, during the holidays, and to say, we're missing Steven this Christmas too, and we wish we could give him a present, or we wish we could make him a stocking, or even sending a gift in his memory, I think like an ornament or a candle. I think, yeah, I think I do. Like, I wish people, even though he's not here, I think every year during the holidays, people will think of their family members who might have passed away. So if you can think about them, like, why not a baby too who has
Yeah.
died?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that's just something that's so important, and remembering them and honoring them is huge. And what was it like, just leading into, you said that you were experiencing, you still were producing breast milk and such. Like, what things were occurring that you weren't expecting and weren't prepared for, and you still experienced postpartum?
Yeah. So what it was like postpartum, I think that when someone experiences pregnancy loss, um, at least in my case, a lot of people were concerned about my mental and emotional health, which um, is definitely valid. I was grieving, I was in a lot of shock, and I was obviously sad, and I was really angry. Um, but not a lot of people asked me how I was doing physically, and and I think because I didn't have a baby in my arms, a lot of people forgot that I had given birth. And so, yeah, I was going through all the, postpartum uh things, like, yeah, my breast milk came in, and when that happened, I think that was one of the most traumatizing things, because the doctor had mentioned that that was gonna happen before I left the hospital, and, she told me not to express the milk or pump or anything because that would just keep the milk coming in, and when it was happening, I didn't even realize it was happening. Um, like, just one day I woke up and my boobs were, like, rock hard and my chest hurt. And I was like, "What is going on?" Like, suddenly, my cami was, like, too tight. in the chest area. And it wasn't until like a day or two later that I realized, oh my gosh, my breast milk is coming in. And and I had no idea what to do. All I knew was what not to do. And so yeah, my basically I just went a week where my chest was like really hurting. And so I didn't really know how to ease the pain, and I didn't even know to ask. Um I was just like, well, I wonder when this is going to be over. And but during that was also just a reminder, my body has no idea what's going on. It thinks the baby came out, which he did. He was born, but he wasn't here to drink the milk. So my body is producing um food and nourishment for a baby that has died. And then also I had postpartum bleeding, and my bleeding lasted pretty long. um I think my bleeding lasted longer after giving birth to Steven than it did after giving birth to Everett. um because let's see, Steven was born in on October 3rd, and I was bleeding still like through Christmas. So but I didn't know. Like, I didn't know what was normal and what was not normal. No one really told me like what was going to happen, and I had my follow-ups weren't normal either. I had a follow-up at 6 weeks, but there was nothing. They didn't do a physical. It was pretty much just to check in and see how I was and to tell me, "Oh, we didn't find anything. We don't know why Steven died." But it was just a, conversation. uh, it was a conversational checkup, not one of those where they, like, go down and see, like, what's if anything has happened, so
Yeah, and I think that's such a common thing that I'm seeing, even, whether in your case where you lost the baby or when the baby is still around, things are happening to us and our bodies are changing, and we just kind of accept it and say, "Oh, I guess this is what I'm supposed to be experiencing." And we don't question it. And I really think having these conversations and talking about it are opening up doors for women to realize, why is this happening and what's happening to me? Like, what is a different way that I can be approaching this? You were in pain with your boobs, and you were just told not to express them, but you weren't told what to do, just what not to do.
yeah. And I've read some articles. I think like there are some hospitals in Europe. I don't know if they do this in the US, but like there are some hospitals that have programs that do support moms who have experienced pregnancy loss or their babies died and their body is reacting this certain way. And like now I know, 2 years later, that there's medication you can take or teas you can drink to stop milk production. I've learned about like the old wives' tales too, like putting cabbage on your breast or eating certain foods. But yeah, I had nothing. And I think also like while you're grieving, um, you don't know to search for that, like you don't know to Google these things because you're sad. And you're just it was really hard for me, like on the mental and emotional side. It was hard for me to get out of bed and to even live my routine life where, I get dressed or I shower, brush my teeth, eat my meals. um so there was no way that I was going to be able to Google these questions and figure out what to do.
Yeah, and your body was still healing from everything that had occurred. Not only were you grieving, but healing physically.
Yeah, and my hormones were in whack, and, and yeah, just going back to I did not know, um, what was really normal for me postpartum, or what was considered normal for me until after, my second son, Everett, was born. Because then, I had something, like, to compare it to, and, with both my pregnancies and both my postpartum experiences, I now know that, um, my skin is super unhappy, during that time. My face broke out so bad, and it took forever for my face to clear up after both pregnancies. But then with Everett's pregnancy, like I said before, my bleeding was a lot shorter, and then it was also different with him, like, because my milk came in and, like, I had a baby to feed. But like, I learned, like, how to even just express milk to relieve my boobs in a way that, like, might not increase the milk production. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting to see, like, wow, these are things that I could have done differently that might have helped me, the first time around.
Yeah. It has been so eye-opening, for me to just hear and experience what you had gone through. And I think it's amazing how you're talking about it and remembering him. Do you think you naturally just were able to cope through it, or you don't think you were processing what was happening? Like you said that you would do things differently.
Yeah, a lot of my experiences with Steven were because he was my first son, and he was my first pregnancy. And so, maybe some of the things that I went through postpartum with Everett was because I had gone through them with Steven. Like, um, like the birthing process, and even the postpartum things. But I think when I look back on giving birth to Everett, it was so different in the way that I was supported and equipped. Like, when I left the hospital with Everett, I had this big folder of things. And a lot of them were like, a lot of the literature was, what to look out for in a newborn and how to take care of a newborn. So I understand not getting that, when I left the hospital without Steven. But but even I think, when people are expecting a living baby, they really want to make sure that the mom is comfortable. And I wish that the doctors or my support system had that type of attitude with me, just because I was having a baby, and not just a living baby. I think that type of care should go into any woman who is having a baby, um, and to validate moms, whether their child is living or not. Because that was another thing I struggled with. I was like, man, um, like, am I even a mom? Because, you know, even though I gave birth to a baby, I'm not leaving the hospital with him. If someone just looks at me and my husband from the outside, we just look like, a new couple. Um, and so we would still get questions like, "Oh, do you have any kids?" And we wouldn't know how to answer that. 'cause obviously we didn't have a kid at the house, but, um but yeah, and I think not having that support too, um, made me question my body a lot, like, how can I trust my body? I feel like my body has failed, um, it couldn't do what it was supposed to do, and I never felt anything odd, or off during my pregnancy, and so I kept thinking to myself like, "Well, was something wrong and I just missed it, or did I just think something was uncomfortable because, pregnancy itself is uncomfortable?" Um, and so I really questioned my, like, sense of reality, like, "Oh, is the way that my body feels normal, or am I missing something? Am I not in tune with myself?" Um, so I think, like, now I I've had to process a lot. I don't know if I'm, like, even answering the question anymore, but I've had to process a lot, like, what was in my control and what was not in my control, and I think, but I wish someone had told me at the hospital, like, "This is not your fault," and,
Yeah. And what do you think really kind of was a turning point or kind of a moment that you knew it was going to be okay and you were getting through this? What do you think helped you the most, or who helped you the most? Because it sounds like you did a lot of stuff more internally and kind of thinking to yourself, and why do I feel this way? And you said, you felt, am I a mom? How do I answer that? Were these conversations that you were having with anybody, or more so having with yourself and working through those questions and moments?
um, so after I posted our, like, announcement of Steven being born and having died on Facebook, um, someone connected me with her friend who also, um, had a daughter die, and, um and she added me to a Facebook group. So I think being in a support group was really helpful. I also, started, going to grief counseling, and that was also really helpful in processing, a lot of my anger because I was really, really angry, um, but didn't know, like, who to be angry at, and, and so I think seeing how other people were processing it and having other people validate my feelings was really crucial in processing it to a point where I could be functional. Um, I think that there's a part of me that is, in a sense, never gonna be okay because Um, because it's still unfair, it's still an unfair thing that Steven died, and there's still a part of me that is always gonna wish that he's gonna be here, or there's always gonna be a part of me that wishes he was here. There's always gonna be a part of me that wonders, what kind of person he would have grown to be, and so I think that support and that validation was so important, and, um, and that's kind of what I mean, I guess. I wish I had that same support from the hospital or from my doctors, because it's one thing to talk about these things and to grieve together with someone who's gone through the same experience. Um, and I think that emotional validation was so important and helpful. Um, but I think I needed that same validation and assurance from, like, medical support, um, to be like, "You did everything you could, you did all the things right, and this was just a sucky situation." Um, and like, I wish that I could have, in those following weeks, I kept wondering, "Well, is this, there was this an environmental thing because I did this, or is this, like, a thing because I did this?" And I think eventually, like, I came to the point where I had to just tell myself, "This is not my fault," because I cannot live my life wondering if it was something that I did. And so I just have to take for, the diagnosis that, like, we don't know what happened. I have to just take it and believe it, even though a part of me is still always wondering, like, well, is it something that I did and maybe because of the timing or whatever, we just couldn't figure it out, you know? Um,
Yeah, and I just appreciate this whole conversation so much. And I think with you sharing your story and developing a message for others to hear and knowing that we're not alone in these journeys, and it might seem unique and like, oh, nobody is feeling this, but coming together with people who have had those experiences, or even just expressing it to somebody and holding that space open, I I think is really helpful to just, discover our own emotions and how we can help others. So I feel like this story and what you're doing and the podcast that you have is really just, being something that someone who firsthand is experiencing this, or someone who is a friend or a family member of someone who is experiencing it, can pass along to that person who is going through that loss, and they can hear it and relate to it and help.
yeah. I, met this mom once, and her sister-in-law was, going through pregnancy loss, and she was just like, "I have no idea, like, I can't imagine what she must be going through, or, like, how I can be there for her or what to do." And, I was like, I think even if you can't understand what it's like to, um even if you can't understand what it's like for your child to die, I think there's more overlap in that understanding than you might realize. Like, you understand what it's like to be a mom, you understand what it's like to love your child, you understand what it's like to be pregnant, and you understand what it's like to give birth, and what it's like to go through that postpartum, um, experience. So I think that there's a lot more. It's really important to me to normalize talking about, um, like, miscarriages and stillbirths and pregnancy loss, because it's not just about whether or not you have a living baby at the end, there's just so much more to it. Um,
Yeah, there's so much more to relate to than you'd realize.
yeah. And I think that there's just so much about being a mom. Um, and you're not, I think you start being a mom, the moment you're pregnant. And so, and I think there's just a lot to it. Like, the experience is not just about the living child in the end. I don't really know the best way to say it, but
Yeah.
um
No, it's definitely made me, uh, think about it a lot more. And like you said, y- you were a mom the second you knew about him, and even though it's not a living child, it's still a child, and you were a mom no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I talk about it, for me, I did get to hold him. And, um, Steven does have a name. And I have pictures of him. I have hand and feet casts of him. So, um, and I forgot to mention this before, but my mom was at the hospital. She came actually, and she got to hold him. And um, so I think like for a lot of friends and family, they never got to see him or meet him or hold him. And so it's easy to feel like, oh, you know, this is like an experience we can sweep under the rug cuz it's like sad, but I'll never forget what it was like to spend those hours with Steven and to hold him and to hug him and um they dressed him up, and so I remember, what he was wearing and his swaddle, and I have those things in a box. So yeah, I think it's just important to and again, I know that there are some moms who don't get to have those experiences, or they don't get to have those memorabilia, but when you're expecting a child and you have these hopes and dreams for them, and you're expecting your life to change in this certain way and it doesn't happen, it's really it can feel really lonely. But yeah, like you said, like no, like I'm not alone. Um and so I think that's important for every mom to remember.
Yeah. This was such a good conversation, and I'm just so thankful for connecting with you and hearing your story. And could you share how we can get in contact with you, and a little bit about if anybody's interested in hearing more and listening to your podcast?
Yeah, so my podcast is called Expecting Rainbow, and it's all about navigating life after pregnancy and infant loss. And people can find it wherever they listen to their podcast. Just look up Expecting Rainbow, and you can also go to expectingrainbow.com, or find us on Instagram at Expecting Rainbow. And I really encourage people to listen, even if you haven't experienced pregnancy or infant loss. Um, and I think, pregnancy and infant loss, it doesn't discriminate, and it's not something you can really prepare for or expect to happen. And so the episodes are just as much for people who haven't experienced it as much as it is for people who have.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And I'm super excited for you, and just, to continue to listen to episodes and hear what's going on in your life. So, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or, how's Everett doing?
He is good. He is taking steps and growing more teeth, and I'm
Aw.
like a little nervous when he's going to start really walking around. He's already crawling everywhere and, getting
How
into
old is he?
he's 11 months. So,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, my daughter's 16 months, so just a
Ooh.
little bit ahead.
Yeah, they're so close in age. Is
Aw.
she walking?
Yeah, yeah, she's practically running, and I can't keep up
Oh
sometimes.
my gosh, yeah, I'm like so nervous about that.
Um,
um but Yeah, actually, speaking of, I have to go nurse him. So
Oh,
this was
well,
perfect
thank
timing.
you. Yes, this was amazing, and thank you so much. So, for me, this episode brought up a lot and made me really realize that we all go through situations differently and on our own time, but we are a lot more alike than we think. We can learn to put our own personal feelings aside and just hold space for someone when they need it most. And sometimes that means just sitting there with them and saying, "This does suck. You didn't deserve this. And you didn't do anything wrong." That can be so valuable to somebody that's struggling. I think this also shows that we need to learn about what it's like for them and really try to understand their individual feelings and not just assume that we know all the answers or because we went through something similar that we can determine what it is like for them. When individuals go through something traumatic, we aren't able to process that we need help or sometimes even have the awareness to search for ways to heal ourselves. So I just want others to be aware that we are all navigating this journey in our own individual ways, but there's so much that we can learn from one another, and there are so many ways that we can help one another. And I really feel like sharing our stories and sharing our hearts and just holding space for others is so beneficial and really what can make a difference here. Well, this wraps up yet another episode of Entering Motherhood. I hope that you have found this episode helpful, and if you liked it, please share it with others who might also benefit from this information. If there's anything that you'd like to know more about, or maybe you know someone who'd like to be on the show, please visit my website, enteringmotherhood.com. I'm so thrilled to be going on this journey with you and getting the amazing opportunity to help moms during this postpartum experience.